So Glenn, would you like to start talking about your project?
Sure, I'll begin. My project actually began with probably a what is happening question. I dug up my old questions. Now, the first questions I asked, which were quite rough, to say the least, but what I was interested in, or maybe how I became interested in this, was I do a fair bit of teaching on student writing. And so I wanted to look at how students are developing as writers, and so I called it simply developing academic writers in general education. As a sort of two-side, how students develop, and then also our role in their development, and that's kind of where I was coming from. And I'd done a project with Aileen Smith in Student Learning Services that was just based around reflections that really made me realize there's a lot more questions to ask here than just what we were able to ask with the bit of data that we had. That wasn't a SoTL project, but from that I was invited to consider doing a SoTL project. I didn't even know what it was. I just filled out some stuff and handed it in, and I was asked to join the team, and I had to figure out what it was I had joined. And I'm really glad I did, because it was very impacting. So the question that I began asking is actually quite important where I started. The study will, this is what I was asking, what is the relationship between perceived and actual growth in student learning? And I wanted to ask that correlation that there is between student self-understanding of their development as academic writers and the development that's evident in their actual writing. So the question that I asked, it was a very complicated question, the kind of question that you wouldn't even know. Like, don't think it'd be easy to figure out how to even do that. So as I went through the training, that got pared down to something that was manageable, which was not a what is happening question, but rather a what works question. And the question is, what are the sources and the strategies that students are drawing on as they're developing as writers? So it became something you could measure by just making lists and counting. And that's a look at my development around that basic question through 2011. I'm looking at identifying, categorizing, discussing the strategies and sources that students were using in the semester, whether it was in my class or whether they were drawing on them for other classes, because I was setting up the project in that way. So what I did is I had them do a pre-inventory. Then I had them reflect every week on either they were reflecting on the writing, if they had just done a writing assignment. They do a fair bit of writing in my class. It's a gen ed class called Text and Ideas, and the theme is on that year was on genocide. And they would reflect either on the writing or on their reading. So they're always doing a reflective element. There were some quizzes in there to hold them accountable as well. And then there were some writing assignments. And there was an analytical essay. So there's quite a bit of writing in that class. So I had a lot of data that I could collect and work on. And the final exam also had an exam essay, which is kind of a distinct feature. But so I had a lot of student writing that I collected. And I began looking at this last summer. I really started looking at it carefully and began to kind of see what it was that was there. And I began to categorize, just exactly like I said I was going to do, making lists. And I have long lists of what students do, and some that they do, more students do than others, and so on. And they're sort of interesting, but they're not surprising, nor are they that interesting. But what was really interesting was that a question emerged out of reading, especially the reflection portions, where I began to see that there were a lot of students who were expressing their development in terms that one might say are negative, or they're a bit hesitant. Sentences of doubt about their development, sentences about their limits, sentences about their failures. These are the sentences that kind of intrigue me. Now, it wasn't all of the students that were doing that, but quite a number of them were. About a third in just the self-evaluation at the end of the semester identified things that they were not doing well. And so I became intrigued with what is happening. I came back to my first sort of category, you might say, and what's really happening? And I began to ask a question. First, I asked a question about myself. Am I really messing these students up? Are they actually losing their sense of confidence? And am I destroying their sense of writers? I had to ask that question. But then, the more I thought about it, I began to think maybe there's a different way of describing something that's been common in the language of education: self-regulation, self-efficacy, that incorporates that struggle that students are in, where they feel that they're not quite what they should be, and that actually that struggle is an important part of their development in identifying what that struggle looks like. So that's where I ended up, and I'm currently working on writing that up and trying to figure out what that's all about.